Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy, NerdModeOn, and welcome to episode 8 of Battle Tested, a video series where I take user submitted loadouts and check and see if they be viable on the battlefield. So today's submission actually comes from Dictator Fool. Now, of course, this is somebody that I actually know. He's a really good friend of mine in real life, and we've also been playing the Battlefield franchise for multiple different episodes, especially when it comes down to Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4. Now, of course, we are both no stranger to the Battlefield franchise by any stretch of the imagination, so of course we definitely have a lot of experience when it comes down to the console side of things as well as the PC platform. As well as that is Dictator Fool is also working on becoming a pilot for the United States military, so of course that's really exciting. I'm definitely really proud of him when it comes down to that aspect, and I hope everything will go according to plan for him, considering that that's really a really high honor, especially in the military. But with all that information kind of talked about, let's kind of indulge ourselves into his loadout request and see how practical it is when it comes down to the Battlefield franchise, which is a little bit more orientated, especially when it comes down to a video game realm. So of course, for the primary weapon, we're going to be using the Scar H. For the attachments for the Scar H, we're going to be using the Coyote red dot sight, the R2 suppressor. We can use any form, but I actually opted for the R2 suppressor in this particular case. The secondary weapon is going to be the M9. Gadget 1 is going to be the medical bag. Gadget 2 is going to be the defibrillator. Our grenade type is going to be the RGO impact grenade. For our knife, we're actually going to be using the box cutter. Granted, if you're a Battlefield 3 player, you're probably very familiar with what the box cutter is. Granted, it is also in BF4 in this particular case. And last but not least, our field upgrade path is going to be combat medic. So with the introduction kind of talked about, as well as receiving our loadout request, let's kind of take a look at the Scar H and see what benefits it offers, as well as let's see what alterations have been done to the weapon since the beginning stages of Battlefield 4. So of course, the Scar H does have a rounds per minute of 620 rounds per minute, which is actually pretty decent when it comes down to it. It's very competitive with a lot of the other weapons like the SAR-21, which on the console platform is very accurate considering that it doesn't have a whole lot of recoil then. But it's also worth noting to say that this is also not the highest in the assault rifle category. You'll have weapons like the M416 and the L85A2 that are far superior in this particular area, but they also have negative attributes assigned to those weapons as well. Now, something to take note of, the Scar H does have a velocity clocking in at 500 meters per second, which is actually on the lower side when it comes down to it, so you're really going to have to compensate for moving targets as well as long-range targets, especially when it comes down to engaging them on larger maps. Now, one of the redeeming qualities about the Scar H is that it upholds a higher damage model in comparison to its competitors. So the Scar H maximum damage is listed as 33 damage per bullet. Now, of course, you'll start to see your damage start to drop off at about 8 meters. However, the minimum damage that this weapon can occupy is 21.6 damage, and that is seen at 60 meters. Now, of course, since the damage model on the Scar H is one of its positive attributes, let's quickly talk about one of its negative attributes, which is most likely its magazine capacity. The Scar H in Battlefield 4 only upholds a 20-round magazine, so of course you can have one in the chamber plus a 20-round magazine to add up to 21 rounds total. But ultimately, that doesn't leave you a whole lot of room for error, so of course you're definitely going to want to be somebody that's a lot more accurate, or at least you take a little bit more time to acquire your targets, considering that it's going to be well worth your time to do so. Now, of course, at the beginning of the video, we talked about how this weapon has a 620 rounds per minute. So, of course, the Scar H doesn't necessarily have a very high rounds per minute by any stretch of the imagination. In correlation with the low rounds per minute, this weapon is actually going to be kicking a lot more substantially than a lot of its competitors. Taking a look at the vertical recoil, it's going to be kicking vertically at 0.5. As well as when it comes down to the horizontal numbers, this weapon is going to be kicking to the left at 0.225, as well as the right 0.225. But ultimately, all this really means is that the weapon is going to be kicking vertically, so of course you can actually counter this pretty easy by just pulling down on the mouse or on the joystick depending on what platform you're playing on. So that's definitely one of the redeeming qualities about the Scar H in comparison to a lot of its competitors. It has very easy recoil patterns, but of course it also kicks a lot stronger than a lot of weapons that you might be used to. Now, transferring right along to the weapon attachments, considering that for the most part, I really don't have any gripes with how the weapon was configured. I'm actually a huge advocate of the Coyote red dot sight, considering that it has minimal housing, which is definitely really good, especially at acquiring targets at medium and long range. And it's also very beneficial considering that I'm always a fan of the red dot sights. I've never really been a fan of the higher optics, especially on the assault rifles, considering that they just magnify the amount of recoil that is already pre-existing on the weapon, which ultimately doesn't really become any more useful, especially at medium and long range, and really hinders my ability personally when it comes down to being effective on the battlefield. However, it is worth noting that I'm actually not a huge fan of the silencers in Battlefield 4. Now, of course, they definitely do have their place, and they're definitely very beneficial to players that are really sneaky when it comes down to navigating around the map. However, if you're somebody like me and you like to play a lot of Operation Locker or Operation Metro, these are not really attachments that are too beneficial when it comes down to being sneaky, considering that Operation Locker and Operation Metro really don't have a whole lot of paths in the first place to actually get a good flank on the opposition. As a due result of this, I quickly found recording for this particular loadout to actually be very difficult, considering that I played a lot of Operation Locker and I was trying to use this weapon in a way that I use a lot of my other weapons. However, it is worth noting that it takes your muzzle velocity from 500 meters per second all the way down to 330 meters per second. This was exceptionally apparent when it comes down to its effectiveness at medium and long range. The Scar H is for the most part a very good weapon at medium and long range combat. However, with this particular attachment, it really felt like the Scar H was going through an identity crisis. It couldn't figure out what kind of a weapon it wanted to be, considering that it was designed for medium and long range combat. But in this particular case, it was struggling to do what it was supposed to be really good at. So of course that was definitely something to try to overcome mentally for myself as well as physically when it comes down to being a lot more effective while using this attachment. I was really struggling while using this in Conquest. Like I said, a lot of the maps that I really enjoy playing are a lot more infantry focused, especially when it comes down to two teams clashing together. However, I quickly found this loadout in particular to be very effective on Team Deathmatch, considering that a lot of players really gravitate towards staring at their radar for a large red dot. So of course, considering I was using a silencer, a lot of players were really taken by surprise when I would come up and mow them down with a weapon that does a lot of damage per bullet, as well as I also had the benefit of sneaking up on them, considering that they weren't really paying attention to their other surroundings. So Team Deathmatch really became one of my best friends when it came down to recording for this particular episode, and it also might come as a surprise considering that I never really play Team Deathmatch. I personally really enjoy playing Conquest Large for the most part, but of course it was really refreshing to play a different game mode considering that I can only play Conquest Large on Operation Locker so many times before I actually want to bash my head into my desk multiple times. So of course, ultimately, it was really refreshing to play a different game mode. Everybody plays a little bit different, and it was really nice to see a lot of players really working together to try to achieve those 100 kills that are required. Now, in terms of the rest of the loadout, of course, this is your traditional medic loadout. There's really nothing that stands out or that's anything absolutely out of the ordinary, considering that defibrillators are great for playing with a team, as well as medical bag really allows you to be aggressive and also heal yourself after combat. Both of our gadgets are really good in correlation with our field upgrade path, which is the combat medic, so of course we're really going to have the ability to heal players faster, pick people up, and also heal ourselves and put down multiple medical bags, especially when it comes down to navigating around the map. So when it comes down to my consensus in relation to this loadout, I actually found it to be one of the more effective ones that I've actually had submitted to myself personally. Of course, there were some limitations along the way, and of course, I'm not necessarily somebody that's in love with the silenced weapons, considering that I'm a lot more about bashing the other team head on. However, if you are of the mind that you like to consistently get behind the opposition and surprise them, then of course this weapon is going to be very beneficial due to the high damage model, moderate recoil, as well as the effectiveness that the Scar H brings to the table. It's also worth noting trying to give this particular loadout in Team Deathmatch, considering that I've also really quickly found that there's a lot of new players in that particular game mode, so of course if you're an experienced Battlefield veteran, you might quickly find yourself to have a little bit easier of a time. But anyway guys, when it comes down to it, that's really all the information I have for the Scar H. Of course, if you guys would like to recommend a loadout for the next episode, feel free to let me know in the comments below using a similar format as this gentleman. But until the next episode guys, this has been NMO, and I'm going to be signing out guys. Peace.